Hey everybody, welcome to my channel and another of my software tutorials. This is going to be an intro to editing in Adobe Premiere. It's not going to cover all the aspects of using Premiere. I have some other tutorials on specific areas or tasks within Premiere that are elsewhere on the channel. This is just going to be a kind of overview and get you started. I actually have an intro to Premiere tutorial already on this channel from several years ago, but they've rearranged some things and how some things work, particularly in the settings. So I thought it was probably time to do an update to that and make sure everything in here matches with what you're hopefully seeing on your screen if you're working on a relatively recent version of Premiere. So I've already opened a project here, and here's my default window layout, and we'll see these change and do some different things as we start editing in here. But I want to start with a couple of settings that are worth checking when you're setting up your copy of Premiere and then when you're setting up a new project, and I'll explain why. So first one, I'm going to go to my Premiere window in settings and timeline. And if you're on Windows, you'll find the settings in a slightly different place, but it's still going to be in your timeline settings. And I'm just going to check this thing here where it says default audio tracks. And I want to make sure these are all set to mono. And your mileage may vary here. If you're always working with stereo media or 5.1 media or something, you can go ahead and leave those as what those are. So I could leave stereo as stereo. But I like to set these to mono because I'm often working with students who have shot on cameras that might record two channels of audio. And let's say they had two microphones on, and one was a lavalier mic and one was a boom microphone. If I leave this as stereo, what Premiere is going to do when it sees that two-channel file is assume this is a stereo channel. It's going to pan one microphone to the left and one to the right, which is not usually what we want. If I have two different microphones miking a scene, again, let's say one was a lav on an actor and the other was a boom on that actor, I want them both centered, and I might end up in sound design muting one of them, but I certainly don't want one of the mics on the left and one of them on the right. So I would just like Premiere to treat all the audio I bring in as just individual mono channels. Again, if you're working on a project where something different makes sense, go ahead and do what makes sense to you, but this is my general recommendation. And I can always change things. So if I bring in a stereo file later and I'm like, I really want this treated as stereo, I can do that. So I'll hit OK there. And then the other thing I want to think about is what kind of media am I going to be working with? There's two different ways I can have Premiere treat my media. One is just work with the raw files. So I bring in some files and whatever it is, it's just going to use those and edit directly with that original media. The other way is to do what's called creating proxies, which is it's going to make lower quality, smaller, easier for the computer to deal with versions of my original media. And I'm going to edit with those. And then at the end, I'll reconnect back to the original media. So my final project will look just as good. It's going to be full resolution, full quality, but it makes it a little easier on my system while I'm doing it. If you're working with very high resolution media or very complex media, like something coming out of a RED camera or some sort of RAW format, I would definitely recommend using proxies. And that's the workflow I'm going to show you here, but also show you if you want to just stick with the original media, you're using small, low res media and your computer can handle it just fine, you can do that. So I'm going to go File, Project Settings, and go to Ingest Settings here. This is what I'm going to leave it as if I just want to work with my original media. I'm just going to leave it as no action. So when I bring in media, just leave it as is. In this case, I'm bringing in some 6K raw Blackmagic footage. That is very large footage that is difficult for a computer to process. I'm just working on my laptop here. So I'm going to go ahead and create proxies. And you can change these settings as makes sense to you. I'm going to do quarter and just stick with the ProRes QuickTime proxy. You could also make your own preset if you had a specific resolution or codec you wanted to use, but these settings will be fine for me. And then I do want to look at the location. So I could put it in the same place my project is stored, wherever that is. And it says right here where my project is. I'm going to actually choose a location so I can keep these someplace specific. And I'll just make a folder here that says Premiere Proxies Tutorial. And I'm going to end up deleting that after I'm done making this tutorial. So now I know all that stuff is in one place. Great. And I don't want a watermark on this. I'm just going to use the footage as is. So I'll hit OK on that. I want to make sure to set that setting before I bring any media into the project. So I could click here to do import media. I could also just drag and drop some stuff in. I can also go over to my media browser, which is another place to look for it. And you'll see this box for ingest is checked here. That's because I just put that setting to make proxies. So it knows when I bring in media, go ahead and create proxies for it. So now I want to find my footage, and I just put a folder on my desktop. And here's the clips I'm going to bring in. So I'm going to select all those and say import those. Again, I could have done this on the same page where there's an import button. And you'll notice when I did that, it's going to open Adobe Media Encoder. This is because I told it to create proxies. It's going to use this software to create the proxies in the background. And you can see here it's doing that. I'm going to go back into Premiere while that is proceeding. Okay, so now I have these 4 clips here. This is a very simple project. I just have 4 clips. I'm just going to make one timeline. So I don't really need to organize things, but I'll show you that I could. So one option would be I could go down here and hit New Bin to create a folder to kind of organize these in, or I could select all this stuff. I'm going to right click on it and say New Bin from Selection, and it'll create a bin and put all that stuff in there. And I'm going to call this Footage. So now I have all my footage in one folder, and bin is just a fancy word for folder in this case. I'll make another one and say this is going to be my sequences, just because I want to keep things sort of organized separately. And now I have all my footage in one place and any sequences I make in another place. I can see here at the bottom, Media Encoder is still working. I could flip over to it and see it's in the middle of processing this clip. It's done 2 of them already. So this will go pretty quickly, but again, I can keep working in here while it's making those proxies, which is something nice. So I've got some footage in my project. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of it. So I can just double click on a clip and it will show up over here in what's called my source window. And this is going to give me a chance to look at the clip. I can see my footage here. And this is just some B-roll stuff I was shooting around Chicago for a documentary. I can drag playhead through here to kind of see what the footage is. And what I'm doing is I want to find the part of this clip I want to use. And I don't have to be precise right now. Some people like to be very precise when they first find the clip. Some people like to kind of rough things out and then trim it up later. But let's say I want this part where this train sort of drives away. So I'll just say that's roughly around here. I'm going to hit the I button for in point, which is this icon right here. That's going to mark where I want the clip to start. And then I'll go to sort of driving away. I'm going to hit O to mark an out point where I want the clip to end. And now you can see I have this part highlighted in gray here. That's the part of the clip I've said that I want to use. Now, as of yet, I don't have a sequence. I don't have any place I've started building a movie. But by default, if I just drag this clip down here, it's going to create one for me. So I can start building my movie. And you can see that sequence showed up here. That's this. It has the same name as the clip I brought into it, but you'll see a different icon. So this icon up here had kind of a picture and some waveform showing that it has picture and sound. This has what looks like sort of 3 horizontal bars on top of each other. This is showing that this is a sequence where clips can be edited together. I'll go ahead and drag this into my sequence bin just to keep things organized. So you can see now it is in there. And then what's showing up over here is that part of the clip I had decided to use. So you can see it's just that part of the clip. Let's do one other clip. I'll bring up a different one. Here's some just nighttime B-roll. And I'll just set an I and an O for in and out point. And let's go ahead and put that right after this. So now my movie has 2 clips in it. So before I move on, I do just want to show you what I did when I went to these ingest settings and did this create proxies thing. So let me go over to my Finder. Here are my original clips. You remember they were in this folder called temp clips. And you can see these are fairly large for what are short clips. I love the Blackmagic 6K cameras. They're great value, but they are ginormous files. They apparently saved money on file compression somewhere along the way. So here's those 4 clips, and you can see total these are 13, about 19 or 20 gigs. Here are the proxy files that were made. You'll notice they are much, much smaller. The total for all 4 files is about 550 or 600 megabytes. So I've made these giant files into smaller files, which accomplishes 2 things. One is it does make it easier for my computer to play these because they are not dealing with this raw footage anymore. They're dealing with transcoded ProRes files that are easier to play. And they're also much smaller files. So if I have a lot of media in this project, I can fit all these files onto one drive and work with things that way. For instance, the documentary project that this footage is from has a lot of footage shot on the Blackmagic camera. It's a feature documentary, so there's a ton of footage for it because documentary, you shoot a bunch of stuff because you're not always sure exactly what you're going to need. And the raw files for it, the original footage, are spread across a whole bunch of drives because there's about 50 terabytes worth of raw footage. But all the proxy files or transcode files, because I'm cutting an Avid, but it's the same exact concept. You're taking that original file and making a smaller, easier to play version of it. All the transcoded files fit on one drive, so I can just bring that drive with me when I'm editing and work off of that instead of needing to bring all 50 terabytes of footage spread across a whole bunch of drives. So data-wise, that's what we've accomplished here. What I did want to point out, I often have a lot of students who worry about making proxies. They're like, oh, but I'm editing and I want my footage to look good and I don't want to be looking at crappy low resolution versions of things. So I'm going to show you, here's my original footage. I just clicked this icon to turn on the proxy. So we're now looking at the proxy footage, and you'll notice this is perfectly good quality to edit with, looks great. I'm not seeing any weird artifacts or anything like this. If you don't believe that it's different footage, I'll go ahead and zoom way in on this. So you can see I'm zoomed in 800% now. If you want to kind of see what we're looking at, I think a little bit of the underside of the tracks there. Right, here's the proxy. Here's the original footage. It's sharper, there's more detail. And remember, we will get back to the original footage when we're done. Your final output will use the original footage, so you're not losing anything. But you can see the proxy has sort of smeared that out a little bit. You can do the same thing over here, zoom in. That kind of, there's our proxy. There's the original footage. Sharper, right? This is 6K raw footage, and we're compressing it a lot to get down to these proxies, much smaller files. Again, if I was blowing this up on a big screen, I could tell that difference, but for purposes of editing, go ahead and work with your proxies. They look perfectly fine. There's no need to worry about it, and it's going to make it easier on your computer to play back. So now I'm playing the proxies, and you can see my edit. So that's our lesson on media and codecs for the day, is go ahead and use your proxies. Don't be afraid of them. Okay, so I've got a couple clips in here, and now things can get interesting. Let's go to another clip, another one of the L. And here's a tip if you are into keyboard shortcuts. I like to keep my fingers on J, K, and L. J will play backwards, L will play forwards, K will pause. If I hit J multiple times, it'll play backwards in fast motion. L multiple times will play forward in fast motion. If I hold down K and then hold down J or L with it, it'll play forwards or backwards in slow motion, so I can find an exact frame I'm looking for. So in this case, I'm just going to kind of randomly select. Here's a little section of people waiting at this train station. I've got my in and out point marked. Again, I and O to do that. And now I want to put it into my sequence. And let's say, for sake of argument here and for sake of learning Premiere, that I want to put it right here between these two clips. Now there's two things I could mean by that if I said I want to put this clip here. One is, hey, I want to keep all of this clip and all of this clip. I actually want to like move this one forward and take this one and put it in that gap between them. So now I have all three of those clips in here like this. I'm going to make this one actually a little longer for demo purposes. Let me take this back out and put this back here. By the way, I have snapping turned on, which is this little magnet thing. Shortcut is S to turn it on and off. You'll see that magnet icon turns on and off. And snapping is, if I'm moving things and I kind of move this close to the end of this, it's going to jump right to the end there. You see that? So it got close and jumps right to the end. And that way I know these shots are exactly lined up. If I have this turned off, that allows me to move this freely. So if I want to just cut off the very end of this clip, I could, or leave a tiny little gap here. Let's zoom in and see. Yep, I left a tiny little gap there of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames. I can do that. If I have snapping turned off, that's going to keep me from accidentally, if I'm zoomed out like this, I might look and say, yeah, I think that's right lined up with that. And actually, maybe I left a little gap. Let's see. Or maybe I overwrote the end of that clip a little bit. Let's go ahead and turn on snapping, and I'll pop that right so I have those right up next to each other and don't leave a gap. Generally, I like to have snapping turned on when I'm moving things around. If you want to move something very precisely, like a frame or two at a time, and particularly if it's right close to a cut, then you're going to want to turn snapping off so you can have that precision, because when you get within a frame or two of something, it's going to just jump it there. The other thing I'll note over here that's turned on right now is linked selection. And what that means is, here's this clip. You'll see it has a video clip and 2 audio parts that all came in together. These were all part of the same shot. If I turn this off, it'll allow me to move those separately. So I can just move the video here and just move this audio here and just move this audio here like that and move these separately. So obviously that's something you sometimes want to do, is be able to work with your audio video separately. For the moment, as I'm just stringing together a basic sequence, I'm going to leave that so that I always move the audio and video together and don't accidentally throw things out of sync. So I've got this clip here. And again, I said one thing I could want to do is kind of put it between these two. The other thing is I could be saying, hey, I want this clip to go, actually I'm going to shorten this back up. I changed my mind. I want this clip to go right here at the end of this first clip, and I want to keep my sequence the same length. So I want to keep whatever's left at the end of this clip, but I want to take this part and just literally drop it in here and replace it. So that's another thing I could mean by saying I want this clip to go here, is I want this to go here and just replace what was already there. So now I have all 3 clips, but I cut off the beginning of this third clip, right? Because my sequence stayed the same length. You watch it. So Here's the original. You can see this clip, the second clip goes that whole way through. And if we're looking for sort of a reference point, you can see at the start of this clip, there's just this car over here on the left side of the frame, and we get it almost halfway through before this other car enters in. If I take this and drop it in here over top of that, the end of the sequence is still at the same place. The end of this clip is still the same, but you notice now this clip starts, we've cut off the beginning of it. This red car here is already in the frame. So that's another thing it could mean when I say I want to put that clip in here. This is the difference between editing what we'd call an overwrite edit or an insert or splice in edit. So an overwrite edit is I take this and I just drop it in on top of whatever was there, and it took the place of it, and we lost some of the footage that was already in here before. Obviously we didn't lose it for good. It's still part of our project. I could go back and get some more of it, but we've taken it out of the sequence. An insert edit, or a splice in edit, sometimes called, is like this, where I drop it in and shove things forward. This is what I demonstrated for you first, where I kind of moved this out of the way, put the clip in, then push this back so they're all nicely snug up against each other. So my sequence actually got longer. You'll notice before it ended right here. And now I'm going to do this, and it's going to push stuff forward. And now my sequence ends here because I put more footage into it and I push this other stuff forward. Here's the whole original shot that's now third in sequence. And so that's two ways to edit in a clip. In Premiere, couple options for how you can do this. If I'm just dragging, the default is to do it as an overwrite edit. And as I'm holding this down here, if you look closely at the icon where my cursor is, you'll see there's a down arrow between two pillars. That's my overwrite icon. If I hold down Command, it's going to switch to an insert edit. And you'll see that arrow is now pointing forward. And I get these little triangles on my cursor here. You can see those triangles pointing forward, kind of showing you we're going to push things forward to make room for this. So here's overwrite, here's insert. Overwrite, insert. Okay. The other way I could do that is with these icons here. So here's my insert edit. You'll see it's got that forward arrow. Here's my overwrite edit. It's got that down arrow. It's very small, but it's there. Or I could use the keyboard shortcuts. So you can see this is comma, this is period. So with my cursor right here where it is, if I do a comma, that does an insert edit and puts this in. If I do a period, that does an overwrite, and this clip goes in, but it took the place of some of the footage that was already there. That's the basics of insert and overwrite editing. And that's the basics of getting clips into a sequence and putting them together. I'll show you one other thing in terms of that aspect. Let's see, is there a clip we haven't used yet? Yes, here we go. Here's a clip we haven't used yet. So what we're always working with is what's called a 3-point edit, which is a fancy way of saying computers know how to count. So what I have been doing is I put an in point and I put an out point, and then I put this cursor somewhere that I want this to go. And so it's going to treat that as the in point if I don't have one, but I could put an in point on my sequence. So I can hit I here and put an in point there, and then it's going to ignore my cursor and it's going to say, okay, start the clip here. And the reason it's called a 3-point edit is because I set 3 points. 1, in point here, 2, out point here, 3, in point here, and I hit edit and the clip goes in and it figures out where that 4th point is. So it says, okay, the clip is this long, 5 seconds and 21 frames. My in point was here, so the out point for it's going to be here, 5 seconds and 21 frames from this. That's straightforward enough, right? This is far and away the most common way people do this, is mark their clip in and out on here and then set an in point on the sequence. Or again, if you don't set an in point, it's going to use the cursor as your in point. So if I just hit period here to do an overwrite edit, it's going to go wherever my cursor was. By the way, moving the cursor, you can use up and down arrows to move to cuts. So you can see it's just moving to each place there's a cut. And if I have an in point or an out point here, those are I and O. I can always remove those by holding down Option and hitting the same button. So Option I will remove this in point. Option O removes the out point. Same thing over here. Option O, Option I. So those are gone. Just letting you know, I can do other things. So let's say I'm doing a music video or something. I've got this all timed to the music. And I'm like, man, this clip is too long, but I don't want to move anything around because that's going to change how everything syncs up with the music or something like that. So you just say like, I want a clip to go right here, kind of break this shot up and be exactly this long and go exactly right here. So I've got an in point and an out point set here. So this time I set both in and out on my timeline, on my sequence. Then I go to this shot and say like, and I want it to end right where this car right here kind of leaves screen. So I'm going to set an out point there. And again, this is a 3-point edit, so I can pick any 3 of the 4. So I've got 3 points. I've got an out point, in point, out point. So I could hit edit here and you'll see it did that. This shot ends exactly there. It goes exactly in the spot we wanted, and it counted back and said, okay, this spot is this long. and I need it to end here. And so it's going to count back and say, okay, set the endpoint for this clip here and take that much of the clip. Again, 3-point editing is a fancy way of saying computers can count. So if it knows where an endpoint is and it knows how long a shot has to be, it can figure out the out point. Okay, so now I've got this all edited together. A couple more quick things, and I think we're done for an intro level tutorial. You may have already seen me doing this, but you can always grab clips and move them around within the timeline. I could also grab multiple things, so I could grab both these and move them together, and you'll see they will maintain their relative distance. Like all these, move them back here. I also have a bunch of other tools over here, so I've just been using my cursor arrows so far, but you'll see I have other options here. So like track select forward would be, right, let me unselect this so nothing is selected. Okay, I could like click here and it's going to select that and everything forward. So I could say, I want to just move all this stuff over and make some room. I could do something like that. There's also a track select backwards, so I could click on this clip and it's going to select everything this and backwards. So these two clips here. If I did it here, it's going to select all these clips and this one. Go back to forward, grab all these, and let's put them back where they started. Razor blade tool, this is to cut a clip. So let's say I want to split this shot in half to do something different with these two different spots. I can take my razor blade here. It doesn't need to be where the cursor is. I'll move the cursor out of the way. I can just put it right here, click it, and it cut that clip. And so now I could work with the second half of this clip and move it over here. And maybe I'm, rearranging some things a little bit like this. And so now I split that shot into two pieces and was able to move them separately. Then we have some titling, grabbing, and shape tools. I'm not really going to worry about those for right now. This is just getting you started with editing. And then the other thing I'd like to show you is our trim tool. And I'm going to go with this rolling edit option. And you'll see if I'm kind of in the middle of a clip, it gets this red slash across it, like I can't do anything with it. But if I get to where a cut is, that slash goes away. And now I can do this. So I'm going to double click on this. And what you'll see here is this program window, which is always showing me the same thing as my timeline. So that's actually an important thing to note. Let me get out of that view. I sort of have just been assuming this, but it's worth stating explicitly. This and this are showing me the same thing. So this is seeing how all the clips lay out to make my movie. And then this is actually watching the edited movie. So you can see as I scroll this one, it scrolls this and vice versa. These are just showing two different views of the same thing. Okay, back to my trim or ripple edit, or sorry, roll edit, I think they call it here. Yeah, I'm used to have it, I call it trim. Okay, double click on this and you'll see this program window changes and it's now showing me two shots. And what it's showing me is the very last frame of this shot over here on the left of the cut and the very first frame of this shot over here on the right of the cut. So I'm seeing if all these frames were laid out one by one by one, what's happening exactly at that cut. And then what I can do is I can adjust this. This is how you can fine tune your edit. So you're looking at something like, I really kind of want this shot to start a little later when that other red car is starting to come into the shot. So I can click on this side of it and you'll see now I'm just cutting on this side. And there's a couple of visual indicators. One is these blue bars at the top and bottom showing me where I'm cutting. So I can cut on both sides or just the left or just the right. The other is if you look at the icon down here, now it's just yellow on the right of the cut. Now it's just yellow on the left of the cut. Now it's red and it's on both sides of the cut to show me where I'm working again. So I click over here on the right, and as I do this, I'm moving that cut forward. I'll move it a lot so you can see it. Now it looks like this is just moving this endpoint backwards. It's not actually affecting anything over here. It's affecting what's happening right here. I'm cutting frames off the beginning of this shot, but it's keeping the cut at the same point. So by taking some frames off, then everything has to move back to keep this seamless and not have a big black gap here. So I get to, okay, and I could do minus and go backwards, add a few frames back, and you'll see I'm kind of getting just to where that car is just entering the frame and say, great, I like that. And then I could play it and say, like, what does this cut look like? And it's going to play around the cut so I can see, okay, that's what that cut looks like. I can say, I want to keep my sequence the same length, but actually move this cut even more forward. So I can select both sides. So now anytime I hit move, for instance, if I do like +5 here, it's going to move the cut 5 frames to the right, but it's going to affect both sides. So it's going to take some frames off the beginning of this shot, but add that number of frames to the end of this shot. So if you watch down here as I do this, you'll see the length of the sequence stays the same. The cut's just going to move left and right because I'm lengthening one shot at the same time as I'm shortening another. Right, so this would be, again, let's say I was doing a music video or something and I want to keep the overall length the same or these other cuts around it in the same spot and I'm just tweaking this cut. I can do this without affecting the overall length. Okay, so that's my trim mode. Favorite of mine. I spend a lot of time in trim mode. So that's how I get footage into Premiere. pick the clips I want and edit them together into basic sequence. It's just that simple. And I have other tutorials that go through titling, exporting, and stuff like that. I will show you quickly. Let's say I was done with this and want to export it. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my proxies. I want to export it at full resolution. I'm going to set an in point at the beginning of it, out point at the end of it, just so I know what I'm exporting. I'll say File, Export, Media, and you can see what I'm exporting, where it's going. I can set the location here, and all sorts of options you can tweak for what format it's in. So let's say I wanted to do a QuickTime movie. I have some options here. I like to do this, select QuickTime, and then I can pick the specific codec that I want. So let's say this was sort of a master quality thing, I could do that. Color space, I have audio options and all sorts of things I can set. And then I can hit export and it will export that file. And that's it. So that's your basics of Premiere. I hope that was helpful getting you started if you haven't used Premiere before. Happy editing, and I'll see you on the next tutorial. Thanks. Bye.